Sag mir den Namen.
Wer ich, der Judas und der Nero, der Kain und der Hitler. Fünfstimme.
Das ist der sechste?
Oh, den haben wir gelogen.
Den habt ihr dazu gelogen.
I'm standing at the bottom right now. I'm working my way to the top. I hate that I'm about to say this. And if you don't want me to go to the top of your lighthouse, you better stop me. Oh, ah! Oh my God, I'm panicking.
Welcome to a world beyond our understanding, a world filled with mysterious and spine-chilling events. In tonight's episode, we will uncover some of the most haunted paranormal cases that have left people terrified and questioning the existence of the supernatural. So are you ready to experience the most haunted cases around the world? 5. The terrifying exorcism of Roland Doe. In 1949, a young boy named Roland Doe underwent a horrifying exorcism conducted by priests, inspiring the film The Exorcist. Roland exhibited disturbing behavior, experienced unexplained scratches, and witnessed strange phenomena like walls rattling and water that would inexplicably drip from both pipes and walls. Most disconcerting of all, his mattress would abruptly shift position without any logical explanation. After failed attempts to seek help, his family reached out to Father Raymond J. Bishop to perform exorcisms, but they were cut short when Roland attacked the priest. A few days later, Roland began to develop red scratches, forming the word Luis. This prompted the family to visit St. Louis University, where they were introduced to Father Walter H. Halloran and Rev, who later conducted a successful exorcism on Roland. When Bodern placed a crucifix under Doe's pillow, the family witnessed furniture flipping over, Roland's mattress shaking uncontrollably, and the crucifix being pushed to the edge of the bed. Roland spoke in Latin, exhibited strange bodily functions, and the final exorcism resulted in a broken nose for Halloran. 4. The Exorcism of Anneliese Michel.
The movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose. What follows is the true story that inspired that, The Exorcism of Anneliese Michel. Ooh.
In the 1970s in Klingenberg, Germany, Anneliese Michel's haunting story unfolded, intertwining faith, fear, and human limits. Born in 1952, Anneliese grew up in a devout Catholic family, but began experiencing seizures at 16. Despite a diagnosis of epilepsy, her behavior darkened, leading her parents to seek help from the Catholic Church. Father Arnold Renz and Pastor Ernst Alt believed Anneliese was possessed by demons.
It's one of the few actual cases of demonic possession that went to court.
All right.
Wait, did they sue the demon?
You'll find out.
Okay.
Despite medical interventions, her mental state worsened, plagued by hallucinations and tormenting voices.
Ich verspreche das so, dass ich in dem Wald rein bin. Ich trag dir die Rotznase noch so lang, bis es lebt wird. Bis auf blöde Weib. Für uns geht's kein Zurück. Nie! In alle Ewigkeit!
Anneliese's tragic battle ended on July 1st, 1976, when she passed away at the age of 23 after prolonged rituals, malnutrition, and dehydration. The investigation found early intervention could have saved her life if she had been brought a week earlier. Parents and priests faced negligent homicide charges in 1976. The trial began on March 30th, 1978. Medical experts testified she was not possessed by demons. Medical experts testified that Anneliese's symptoms were not demonic possession, but a result of her upbringing and epilepsy. The defense argued the exorcisms were lawful. Recordings from the exorcism sessions were played to support the claim of possession. The priests testified that demons identified themselves as Lucifer.
Im Namen deines seligen Jungfrau, im Namen Jesu, befehle ich dir auszufahren. Im Namen des dreifaltigen Gottes, auszubaden. Im Namen des dreifaltigen Geistes befehle ich dir auszufahren und nicht
Cain, Judas Iscariot,
Die müssen in eigenen Seminaren ausgebildet werden, die dürfen nicht auf die anderen Universitäten. Kapiert?
Klar. Ist da sonst noch etwas zu sagen? Weil der Teufel größere Macht.
Hitler,
Ihr Klötze. Nein, ihr Klötze. Und der Maul, ihr Klötze. Oh, so der Milane, do, ich gerne, do.
Sind wir schon drei?
Wie. Was ist so eine Scheiße?
Nero, and others.
Die Ruhe. Ruhe gibt's nur da oben.
Ruhe gibt's nur dort, wo die Liebe ist.
Ja, bei uns gibt's nur no.
Nur Hass.
Ja,
Wo nur Hass ist, da gibt's keine Ruhe.
nein. Und für uns gibt's nie Ruhe. Nie.
Weil
Ewigkeit.
The verdict found the priests and the Michaels guilty of negligent homicide. After the trial, the Michels requested permission to excavate their daughter's remains, as she had been hastily buried in a low-cost coffin. Nearly 2 years later, on February 25, 1978, her remains were transferred to a new oak coffin with a tin lining. The body showed signs of decay, typical for a corpse of that age, according to official reports. Note 3. The Haunted Fort of Bangar. Bangar Fort in Rajasthan, India, was built in the 16th century by Raja Bhagwant Das. It thrived in the past but now lies in ruins, known as the most haunted place in India. The curse of Bangar is attributed to two legends. The first involves Guru Balu Nath, a holy man who allowed the fort's construction on the condition that its shadow never fell on his dwelling. The second legend revolves around Princess Ratnavati, known for her beauty. A tantric named Singya tried to win her over with dark magic, but she rejected him. In his desperation, Singya cursed the princess, fort, and town.
One being the most famous one of Rani Ratnavati, right? A beautiful queen who used to stay within the fort, who was like the in charge of that entire place. And then you hear the story of a tantric who kind of wanted her in his life. So he tried his level best to kind of get her attention, but things didn't work out. And then there was a curse that the tantric actually put on the people there, and he ensured that that place gets into ruin.
Number 2. The Ghosts of the St. Augustine Lighthouse. Deep in the heart of St. Augustine, Florida, stands a lighthouse that has been a beacon of light for over 145 years. But this towering structure is not just a symbol of navigation and safety, it is also known for something much more sinister, its haunted past. The ghost of a lighthouse keeper who fell to his death while painting the tower has been spotted watching over the grounds. And ever since the horrific deaths of 3 young girls who drowned when the cart they were playing in broke and fell into the ocean, visitors have claimed to hear the sounds of children playing in and around the lighthouse. Number 1. The Curse of La Llorona. Generations of Mexican children have grown up afraid of La Llorona. The legend of La Llorona is traditionally told throughout Mexico, Central America, and northern South America. La Llorona is the vengeful ghost of a crying woman named Maria in Mexican folklore. Conclusion: In closing to today's video, whether these stories are legends or real hauntings, one thing is certain: they will continue to scare and intrigue generations to come. Thank you for joining me on this spine-chilling journey into the world of paranormal cases. I hope these stories have sparked your curiosity and left you with a sense of wonder about the unknown. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more bone-chilling cases. Until next time, stay safe, and remember to always protect yourself when dealing with the unknown.
The Ammons haunting case is one of the most terrifying documented cases of demonic possession of the 21st century. This case is backed not only by legitimate DCS documents, but also by official police records, all of which claim that something truly evil was occurring at this house in Indiana. The story was publicized in January of 2014 when the house became infamously known as the 200 Demons House, or simply the Demon House, because it was said to be haunted by at least 200 spirits. Hey everyone, Ordinary Horror Guy here, and this is the terrifying true story of the haunting of Latoya Ammons. Latoya Ammons was a mother of 3 who moved to a suburban home in Gary, Indiana with her mother Rosa Campbell in November of 2011. They rented a house located at 3860 Carolina Street, set in a very quiet neighborhood lined with mostly one-story houses. The house consisted of 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a living room, and a basement that led up to a small kitchen. It was a relatively standard house and perfect for the size of their family. The 3 children, then aged 7, 9, and 12, are largely unknown but play an extremely important role in the story. For the sake of the video, we'll refer to them as Connor, Jacob, and Alyssa. During the first month, the house was relatively normal. The family was just getting settled in and nothing unusual really stood out until later that December. One day, huge black flies randomly started swarming the screened porch at the front of their house. The family was completely dumbfounded as to why this was happening and thought, is there something rotting around here that's causing all these flies? However, there wasn't anything rotting, so their only solution was to just try and swat all of them. But as they kept killing swarm after swarm of flies, they just kept coming back. At some point, they gave up and just waited for the flies to go away, which they eventually did. Although this experience was far from normal, they just chalked it up to a strange occurrence, and at this point, they were more annoyed than scared. However, things began to change as the days progressed. Several times well after midnight, Latoya and her mother both recall hearing heavy footsteps coming up the basement stairs and even creaking open the door that led into the kitchen. But when they went to check who was there, they didn't find anybody, just an empty door leading into a dark basement. They eventually tried locking the door to see if it would prevent the noise, but it continued regardless. This is when Latoya and her mother really started to get creeped out. Their fear intensified when one night Latoya's mom Rosa was sleeping in her bedroom and suddenly awoke to see a shadowy figure of a man pacing back and forth across the living room. As she stared out of her door down the hallway, she couldn't believe her eyes. She eventually dashed out of bed, turned on all of the lights, and what she saw terrified her. In the living room, right where the shadowy figure had been pacing, were these big wet boot prints all across the wooden floor. These puzzling experiences only increased in the months to come. By March 10th, 2012, after nearly 4 months of these odd occurrences, something would happen that would shift this story from just creepy to absolutely horrifying. A few days prior, one of Latoya's loved ones had passed away. Latoya had been mourning with her family and a group of friends in the house at around 2 o'clock in the morning. At some point during the night, Latoya started screaming for her mother to come to her room. As Rosa rushed down the hall to enter her bedroom, she saw something truly unexplainable. Latoya's 12-year-old daughter Alyssa was completely unconscious and levitating directly above Rosa's bed. In a state of shock, the only thing Rosa and Latoya could think of doing was to pray around the bed and hope she would snap out of it. After a while, she slowly descends onto the bed and wakes up with no recollection of what just happened. At this point, the family is completely convinced that something paranormal is taking place in their house. Being of Christian faith, they first looked to local churches for help. They began asking around for advice, but most of the churches refused to do anything. Only one complied and visited the house to investigate, and unsurprisingly, they came to the same conclusion. Something strange was definitely happening in this house. Latoya and her mother followed every piece of advice the church offered. They cleaned the entire house with bleach and ammonia, used olive oil to draw crosses on all the doors and windows, and even anointed the children's hands and feet with the oil as well. The use of oil might seem strange outside of a religious perspective, but in Christianity, anointing oil is seen as symbolic of God's protection, so naturally, the Ammons family saw this as the best option to combat the evil spirits. They also reached out to a couple of clairvoyants for some insight. After investigating the house, these clairvoyants believed that there were over 200 evil spirits haunting it, leading to the house being dubbed the 200 Demons House. They were urged to move out immediately, but at the time, Latoya didn't have the money to move anywhere else. As an alternate effort, they set up a shrine in the basement with a statue of Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, where they lit candles and read from Psalm 91 of the Bible as a form of ritual to try and rid themselves of the evil spirits. For the next 3 days, nothing happened and things seemed completely normal. However, that didn't last for long. After these 3 days, things took a very bad turn and real demonic possessions started to occur, not only possessing Latoya, but also her 3 children. She reported feeling warm, lightheaded sensations whenever spirits started attacking her, almost like an acute fever. She would lose control of her body and just start trembling as the demons attempted to take over. Periodically, she also witnessed terrifying instances with her children. At times, seemingly out of nowhere, they would develop these huge bulging eyes and evil smiles while talking in low growling whispers. As if the possessions weren't enough, the spirits became much more physical and intrusive in the coming weeks. One day, the family recalls Connor being thrown out of the bathroom as if someone had just chucked him as hard as they could. Alyssa also remembers being randomly hit in the head with a flying headboard, and at times feeling as if someone was grabbing her by the neck and attempting to suffocate her. Demonic voices also told the children disturbing things, such as how it feels to die and that they would die soon and never see their family again. By April 19th, 2012, the family was so desperate for help that they reached out to their physician, Dr. Jeffrey Onyekwu. Latoya told him every little detail of what had been happening, and he eventually agreed to visit their house to witness these strange occurrences himself. And sure enough, he witnessed it. During Onyekwu's visit, both Connor and Jacob started screaming and cursing at him in demonic voices before being chucked backward extremely hard into a wall. The police were called and the children were taken to the Methodist Hospital campus. Onyekwu stated that he hadn't experienced something this horrifying in his complete 20 years as a physician. At the hospital, Connor didn't calm down. He remained in an entranced demonic state, convulsing and screaming, requiring multiple doctors to hold him down. The commotion prompted an anonymous call to the Department of Child Safety, reporting Latoya for possible child abuse. A DCS case manager named Valerie Washington arrived at the hospital to inspect the children and conduct an interview. However, after careful examination, they determined that there wasn't any marks or bruises on the children that appeared to be from physical beatings. And after talking to Latoya, they concluded that she wasn't mentally unstable, making it unlikely she had been abusing the children. Valerie then attempted to interview Connor and Jacob twice, but each time they started acting crazy, talking in demonic voices again. At one point, Jacob even glided backward across the floor, hovered up the wall, and flipped in midair flawlessly, landing on his feet. These occurrences were documented in legitimate DCS reports, making it nearly impossible for this to not have happened. Both Valerie and a hospital nurse who had witnessed this recalled running out of the room in pure terror. At this point, 3 trustworthy bystanders confirmed without a doubt that what the Ammons were experiencing was something supernatural. That night, Latoya looked after Connor in the hospital, while Rosa took Jacob and Alyssa to stay at a relative's house. Coincidentally, it was Connor's birthday the very next day, so to take the children's minds off the stressful situation, they celebrated at the hospital, singing and eating cake together. However, bad news struck soon after. Valerie returned to the hospital and informed Latoya and her mother that the children would need to be taken into temporary protective custody without a court order. She claimed the kids were suffering from, quote, spiritual and emotional distress. The kids were terrified and Latoya couldn't even take them home to care for them. On the same day, a chaplain at the hospital called a man named Michael Maginot. He was a reverend at a local church and was asked to perform an exorcism on Jacob as soon as possible. However, he was a bit skeptical about whether the Ammons were experiencing true demonic activity, so they invited him to their house to experience it himself. He conducted a 4-hour-long interview with both Latoya and her mother, and sure enough, strange things began to happen. Lights flickered, blinds in the kitchen wafted in the air, and he even saw the same wet footprints in the living room that Rosa had experienced months earlier. During the interview, Latoya started feeling that same warm, lightheaded sensation before her possessions occurred, so in an attempt to help her, Michael placed his crucifix on her forehead. She started violently convulsing and thrashing around. By the time she had calmed down, Michael was entirely convinced convinced that there was demonic activity in the house. He even stated that he believed the spirits were threatened by his presence. He quickly blessed the home and urged Latoya and her mother to stay with other relatives, which they did. A week later, they cooperated in an investigation of the house conducted by their DCS case manager, Valerie, and officers from local police departments. Among these officers was the chief of the Gary Police Department, 37-year-old Charles Austin. He said he believed in the paranormal, but really didn't subscribe to the existence of demons. However, this investigation would quickly change his mind. Latoya didn't enter the house out of fear, but her mother went inside to help the officers navigate. She pointed out a notorious spot in the house for activity, the space underneath the basement stairs. She told the officers that the activity often manifested in the form of ghostly orbs. In other parts of the house, the officers also began noticing strange occurrences. One of the audio recorders an officer carried showed that the battery was almost dead, even though he had replaced it that same day. They also claimed to have heard a faint whisper when listening back to another recorder, which simply said, "Hey." Photos were taken around the house, and one specifically taken under the stairs appeared to show two figures when the police enhanced the image. Although the enhanced images weren't provided, so I took the liberty of adjusting it myself to see what I could find. I'm no expert at this, but when adjusting the curves of the image, you can kind of see a black figure under the stairs. And when it's zoomed in and adjusted even more, you can kind of make out another face directly to the left of it. Does this mean there's proof of demons? Not at all, but again, I don't know exactly what they did to the image, but they seemed pretty convinced that something was definitely there. Additionally, a photo was taken outside of the house when no one was home, showing a ghostly white figure standing to the right of the front porch. After the officers finished their investigation, they were undoubtedly spooked, especially Chief Charles Austin. He claimed that as he was driving home for the day, his police radio started malfunctioning, and his driver's seat kept drifting back and forth, even though it had been working perfectly fine on the drive to the Ammons house. When he got home, his garage door refused to open, even though the power was working fine everywhere else. Later that month, the DCS obtained an official court order for the temporary custody of Latoya's 3 children after it was discovered that they had missed numerous days of school over the course of 3 years. While Latoya took responsibility for the subsequent years, she explained that she had allowed them to skip school due to the terror and exhaustion from sleepless nights dealing with the spirits in their house. Regardless, Jacob and Alyssa were sent to St. Joseph's Carmelite home in Chicago, while Connor was sent to Christian Haven in Wheatfield, Indiana for a psychiatric examination. Clinical psychologist Stacy Wright conducted the examination on Connor. She observed that Connor behaved normally when asked everyday questions, but would suddenly act possessed, as she put it, when faced with intense, challenging questions related to the demonic activity. His stories also became convoluted and inconsistent, changing each time he recounted them. Further tests concluded that Connor had no psychotic disorders. Stacy even blamed Latoya, suggesting that she might have been neglecting her children and fabricating the entire story. Similarly, Jacob and Alyssa were evaluated by another clinical psychologist named Joel Schwartz. As they described the strange occurrences they had experienced, doors slamming, items moving randomly, and the family falling into trances, Schwartz came to the same conclusion. He believed Latoya was unstable and fabricating the entire situation despite her having been evaluated and deemed sane. However, this is a common reaction from people who haven't experienced the paranormal firsthand. They often point fingers and place blame without knowing the entire story. Unfortunately, this was challenging for Latoya because she knew she wasn't making anything up and had strong alibis in her defense. Yet, this wasn't enough to regain custody of her children. On May 10th, 2012, there was a significant search of the Ammons residence for any strange phenomena that could further build a case. Latoya, her mother, Charles Austin, the Reverend, a couple of other officers, and a new DCS case manager named Samantha Illich attended the search. Their previous manager, Valerie, had stated that she never wanted to go back to the house. Their primary focus was the basement, where they claimed to have seen the 2 figures under the stairs. In that same spot, there was a patch of dirt, and Reverend Michael asked the officers to dig a hole to search for potentially cursed items. They dug a 4-foot by 3-foot hole in the ground and discovered various random items, ranging from white underwear to a small frying pan. Although these were unlikely to be cursed, Michael blessed them with salt just in case. After an extensive search, they found nothing of interest in the house, and people began to feel uneasy and wanted to leave immediately. The only ones who remained were 2 officers and Reverend Michael. During their part of the investigation, they noticed a strange oil dripping from the Venetian blinds in one of the bedrooms, and no matter how much they wiped it away, it just kept reappearing. As the officers stood puzzled, Michael explained that this was a common manifestation in the presence of a demonic entity. At this point, nobody was taking things lightly. Something needed to be done right away. Soon after, Michael sent a document detailing all the strange occurrences to a local bishop named Dale Melzik. He requested permission to perform an exorcism based on their experiences. Initially, the bishop denied his request, leading him to conduct a less powerful exorcism that didn't require church authority. A few days later, Latoya, Michael, Stephanie, and 2 officers gathered at the Ammons residence for the exorcism. Michael read from the Bible, said prayers, and attempted to verbally cast out the demons that attached themselves to Latoya. Everyone recalled feeling very uncomfortable during this process, almost as if they were being intensely watched. However, after the exorcism, Michael was unsatisfied with the results, believing it had done little help. He then asked Latoya to research any specific demons that she believed might be responsible for all this. He claimed that knowing a demon's name would grant more authority over it. After extensive searching, Latoya believed she had found some promising results. However, Michael was quite concerned. One of the main demons that she believed was tormenting her was named Beelzebub, also known as Lord of the Flies in English translation. Beelzebub was a horrifying and infamous spirit in demonology. It was known to have a fly-like appearance but could also shapeshift into various monstrous forms. Known as one of the 7 princes of hell, it was considered very powerful and capable of possessing multiple people. If you recall, in the beginning of these strange events, flies swarmed Latoya's front porch, adding to the fact that this just might be one of her demons. Although terrifying, this was one of the few explanations that made sense. Fortunately, Bishop Melzik finally gave Michael permission to perform an exorcism on Latoya with church backing. This was a pretty significant development because church-approved exorcisms are believed to be more powerful. Michael conducted 3 separate exorcisms on Latoya at the local Maryville church. 2 were conducted in English and 1 in Latin. During these exorcisms, he praised God and commanded the evil spirits to leave Latoya Ammons and her house as he pressed a crucifix against her head. Throughout the process, she convulsed violently more than she ever had before, revealing the immense power these spirits held over her. Latoya compared the feeling to intense childbirth, as if something was striving to remain inside her and cause as much pain as possible. However, over the course of the month, the spirits slowly began to leave Latoya and her family alone. By the 3rd exorcism, their problems finally subsided. It was the last time she ever saw Michael Maginot, but she was eternally grateful. There were finally no more disturbances, and in November of 2012, Latoya eventually regained custody of her children. They moved to Indianapolis and haven't experienced any paranormal activity since. The house at 3860 Carolina Street hasn't shown any signs of activity either. However, in 2014, when the Ammons story was made public, it became a global spectacle. People were deeply interested in the events that transpired. Latoya and her mother were featured on multiple news stories recounting their experiences, and paranormal investigator Zach Baggins eventually purchased the house that same year. It was used to film a documentary based on the haunting events called Demon House. Unfortunately, the entire building was demolished just 2 years later. Latoya and her family went through a harrowing experience over the course of an entire year, dealing with what appears to be a true demonic possession. However, they are undoubtedly relieved that the nightmare is finally over. But that's going to be it for today. I hope you guys did enjoy. As you already may have noticed, this is a new channel that will be uploading weekly videos covering a range of disturbing topics, from urban legends to true crime and even true horror stories. So if you enjoyed today's video, stay tuned for more content just like this. We also have a subreddit dedicated to the Ordinary Horror Guy channel, where you can help me out and post video suggestions for cases that interest you. Additionally, we also have an email where you can submit your own personal horror stories if you'd like them to be featured in a video. You can find all the relevant links in the description if you'd like to check them out. Thank you guys, I'll see you soon in the next video.
Sometimes the things you see in the shadows are more than just shadows.
I used to live in a haunted house. In fact, we were in a book called the Ponoco Ghost Book. A huge family was massacred by the Indians, and their souls are still wandering. We had many, many experiences with the children of the family. We started using a Ouija board, and I found a spirit, a little boy who was killed with an axe by a man he thought was his father. A few years later, I decided to use my board again. The spirit located me again and led me to his grave. Interestingly enough, on the gravestone was a carving of a little boy with a man behind him, and behind the man, an Indian with what was probably their version of an axe back then. I believe the Indian killed the boy, but the boy thought it was his father. When I reported back to him, he seemed to be at peace with this information, and I have never heard from him since. I've communicated with spirits for years, but this was the first interactive type of experience I ever had. A friend had a blind dinner date at a guy's apartment and was afraid to go alone, so she roped me into coming along and being set up with his roomie. After dinner, they wanted to play with their Ouija. I refused. It was exactly 9 months from the day my father had died, and I was feeling pretty out of it. I was wearing jewelry he'd given me, as well as one of his t-shirts and one of his sweaters to feel closer to him. The room was dark, and I began to feel as if the oxygen was leaving the room. They asked the Ouija who it wanted to speak to, and it began to spell out my childhood nickname. Cheryl didn't know it because she was a fairly new friend. She'd never even known my dad. I made a noise and said no, then told Cheryl I wanted to leave right then and there. They asked who it was, and it spelt my father's name. And again, no one there knew it. I got upset and said I knew it was lying. The candles blew out, and Cheryl screamed because she said she could not move her hands off of the pointer, and neither could the boys. They were dumbfounded. I began to be choked by an invisible entity, and I was writhing on the floor and calling for my dad to help me. Meanwhile, our friend had been sent to pick us up at 8 p.m. for us to go out with him. He heard us screaming. He came in, and everything seemed to rush out of the room. He dragged me out and locked me in the car, and then went back in for Cheryl. We never spoke of it again. The guys tried to call us and apologize and get us to talk about the incident. We told them to leave us alone. I feel very strange telling you this, but this was an incident that happened 2 years ago and still leaves me perplexed. My best friend and I had been using a Ouija for 4 years before this happened. We usually contacted the same spirits who claimed that they had been our soulmates in many lives. Because of this, they tended to get a little overprotective, moody, and act like typical guys when it comes to real men in my life. Usually, they would claim that if I liked a guy, it was because he was an incarnate of one of them. But with one particular boyfriend, the spirits had a big problem. On many occasions, Ervim, the most protective of the spirits, told me I had to break up with my boyfriend, that he was a demonic sort of spirit that would do eternal harm to mine. I ignored Ervim, saying that I couldn't break off a perfectly good relationship based on the jealousy of a spirit. But Ervim persisted. One day, he asked me to look at my drawing pad. I looked, and found that one page in my new book had become wet and had dried, leaving behind traces of a yellowish substance. Upon tracing lines around the yellow impressions, I realized he had left me a note written in the angelic alphabet, as seen in Buckland's book. I went home and translated the alphabet, and it read, "Beware bats." That phrase meant nothing to my best friend, but it did mean something to me. My boyfriend, the very one Ervim was warning me about, was an avid collector of bat paraphernalia, and even had a bat tattooed on his back. The really creepy thing about all this is that I finally did break up with my boyfriend because he told me that he believed he was a fallen angel and that he could produce an ethereal alter ego to avenge his sorrows. The point is that my boyfriend did turn out to be psychotic, if not demonic, and Ervim had given me the physical proof to believe so. No one but myself, in my immediate circle, is familiar with the angelic alphabet. No one knew about the bats. No one had a chance to draw in my art book. And with what? I am in my late 30s and now living in Massachusetts where I grew up. I was a middle child of 5 in a very close family. When we were really young, my 2 younger sisters and I were always fascinated with the unknown. We would look in the obituaries in the newspaper to see who had recently passed away, and we would have seances in our garage with some other local neighborhood kids. Usually nothing would happen, but a couple of times, some weird things happened that we just could not explain. When my sisters and I were in high school, we learned about Ouija boards. We bought one and began to play with it. 2 of us would get on it, and the other would write everything down. At first it was fun. We talked to several different spirits that told us where they were from and about their families. This went on for weeks. Then, gradually, things started getting a little scary. Eventually, every time we got on the board, the same spirit would come on, who was not very nice. He told us he was the devil, and he was going to get us somehow. He called himself Zozo. When a friend of ours confronted our priest about this name, he got very angry and told us we should not be playing with Ouija boards. They were not toys, and we could get into trouble. He gave his Sunday sermon on the subject. Needless to say, we stopped playing with it. While still in high school, one of my sister's best friends lost her sister in a van accident. She and her sister were very close. She knew of our adventures with our Ouija board and begged my sister to let her come over and use it to talk to her deceased sister. Hesitantly, my sister sat down with her and contacted her sister with the board. Her friend bawled and told her sister how much she loved her and missed her. She didn't want to live anymore without her and wished she could be with her. About 2 weeks later, my sister's friend died. In a van accident. Exactly the way that her sister had died. My sister took the Ouija board and put it out with the trash, and none of us has touched one since. One night, my brother and I were playing with my new Ouija board, and it didn't take long for the entity to come. As soon as it was there, I felt this strange feeling come over me. It felt as if something was inside of me. It got hard for me to breathe, but I didn't say anything. We asked the entity if it was good or evil, and it spelled out, evil. Right then, I knew something was wrong, because the entity was getting upset. It got harder and harder for me to breathe, until finally it felt like something pushed me, and it was over. Ever since that night, strange things have been happening in my home. Doors shut by themselves. I hear strange noises and see shadows in the middle of the night. Although this experience scared me, I still bring out my Ouija and talk to entities, even the upset ones. I ask them what their problem is and see if there's anything I can do to help. I just hope I never run into that same entity that tried to choke me. About 20 years ago, my friend and I decided to start playing around with the Ouija board I received for Christmas. In the interest of fair play, we did it as the box suggested, sitting on chairs facing each other with the board on our knees. We closed our eyes and had my sister act as secretary, recording each letter. My sister was about 13 and was not making anything up, as different friends also stood in for her when she wasn't around. Within minutes, we began to receive sentences that made sense. Eventually, the board told us we were communicating with someone named Savatu. He said he was an Incan warrior and that he wanted to talk to us. My friend and I became addicted to this game, and for weeks we would sit in my room, light incense, smoke cigarettes, and have sessions. Savatu would tell us jokes and ask us questions. After a few weeks, the nature of the messages changed. They became somewhat intimate, menacing, and rude. One night, Savatu told us he wanted us to come away with him. During that same session, the pointer flew out of our hands and hit the wall. At that point, we got freaked out and decided to put the Ouija away for a while. I began having nightmares, and so did my friend. I took to sleeping with a crucifix on and a Bible in bed with me. I began to fear the Ouija board, and my friend said she would take it to her boyfriend's house because he wanted to mess around with it. She was driving out to his house with the board on the seat beside her, and her car began to smoke and stalled on a dirt road. She got out of the car and threw the Ouija board into a cornfield, then got back in the car. It started, and she drove safely to his house. I was very fearful for about a year or so afterward that I was being haunted, but eventually the fear went away. I have never again touched a Ouija, and do not intend to. Me and my friends Selena and Martha, Selena's sister Jasmine, and our common friend Emma. We are 5 in a group. One night at 7:30 p.m., we all decided to have a party at my house. My parents had gone out for an important meeting and would not return until the next day. All of us had decided to have fun. Martha had brought a Ouija board along with her. I asked her, "Why have you brought this with you?" To which she replied, "We must include them in our party as well." We partied hard, and then at 12 a.m., we decided to play with the Ouija board. We placed the board on a table and lighted some candles. Selena started the session. "Is anyone there who would like to communicate with us?" Selena asked. There was no reply. Selena spoke again. "Don't hesitate to talk." Again, there was no reply. We got bored after asking 21 times and decided to watch TV instead. As the girls had to stay in my house for the night, they went to change their clothes. When it was finally Martha's turn to change, she went to the washroom. Suddenly, we heard Martha scream and we rushed to see what had happened. Martha was crying, and she said, "I just now saw myself walking across the washroom." At first, we didn't understand what she meant, and we thought that she was trying to scare us. But then, she showed us a scratch mark on her arm, which was not possible for her to make. We then thought to ask the Ouija board again. This time, I decided to ask the questions. "If anybody is here, please tell us. Is anybody there?" Strangely, this time, the board decided to answer back. "Yes." "Who are you?" The board pointed to the letter D. "D who?" The board slowly spelt out the word, "Death." "What do you want from us?" "Blood. Your flesh as well," the board answered. And this was enough for us. We all left everything and ran towards the door, but the door did not open, and we realized that we had been locked in my own house. Some more supernatural things started happening. The lights were flickering, and things were being thrown here and there. We somehow managed to hide in one of the rooms, but to no avail. Martha got very angry, and she asked with a loud scream, "Why don't you leave us alone?" To which the Ouija replied, Your screams make me powerful. Selena, in frustration, burned the Ouija board with a gas cylinder. The moment the Ouija board was burned, the front door opened with a loud noise, and without wasting any time, we ran out of the house. But the thing that happened after that is the most horrible part of the story. We all got out, but when Martha was about to step out the door slammed shut. For a second, everything was dead silent, but after that, we heard her screams from the inside. We banged on the door and called out her name. After some time, our neighbors came and we managed to break down the door. We found Martha lying unconscious on the floor. We took her to a hospital. After that day, Martha never spoke a word again. Later, we found that the spirit whom we had called through the Ouija board was David, who was Selena's half-brother. He died due to an accident. David was never good when he was alive, or dead. Martha was admitted to an insane asylum, and even today we don't know what exactly happened on that night. But whenever I look into her eyes, I get shivers all around my body, and I feel something horrible had happened. My family and I ended up moving from that house. Looking back, I have to ask myself the question, why did we do that? Because all of our lives have changed. I still feel a bad presence around me. I have been connected with a spirit named D in the past. He said he was trying to hurt me, and that he was evil. Ever since I was done with that session, every spirit after that wanted to escape my board by attempting to count down through the numbers and going to corners of the board and spelling out. I earlier today scanned my Ouija board and the letter D was scratched into it. I still decided to play, and connected with a spirit named C, who claimed he was good, and he warned me and my friend that D was around, and he wanted to harm us. C also said that he connected with us to protect us. We thanked him for the information and closed the session. Later that night, we again attempted to play. We once again connected with C, and he said that prayer will make D more mad, and my friend asked if D was around us, and C spelt out R-U-N, run. We quickly closed the board and ran to our friend's house who closed the portal. To close this portal, we had to play once again. Our friend, Andrew, asked the questions and we were the players. The spirit that connected with us once again was C. He said that D wanted out, and that he will possibly try to make him stay in the portal longer. We put it to goodbye, and I am saying goodbye to my Ouija board this night. Whoever says it isn't real needs to experience it for themselves. I always started with a prayer and the burning of a sage. There is a possible chance of playing it and having something dangerous happening. I need to know if anyone else has connected with a spirit named D. I have had 3 encounters with Zozo. The first time I ever played with a Ouija board, I had not heard about Zozo, and I wanted to prove that Ouija boards were fake. So I said, "Are there any spirits willing to communicate?" And the planchette moved to yes. So I then asked for its name, and it spelt Zozo. So I said goodbye. A year later, I told my friends about it, and they said they wanted to do it, so we all did. Once we started the session, I asked the same question. Are there any spirits willing to communicate? Again, the planchette moved to yes. So I then asked, are you from the sun or the moon, and the planchette went to moon. We then asked, "What's your name?" and it spelt out, Zozo. I was going to say goodbye, but then my friends asked, "Are you going to hurt us?" And Zozo said, "Yes." We all decided then to say goodbye. We decided to try it again the next day, and the same thing happened, except that time we said goodbye before going too far. Ever since beginning these sessions, some weird things have occurred in my house, but I still continue to play with the Ouija board. My siblings and I had an encounter with the paranormal through a Ouija board last year. My 3 older sisters, Sam, Karen, and Sarah, had come over that day to help me unpack in my new apartment, where, in a box, my grandmother had given me a glow-in-the-dark Ouija board. The girls were completely fascinated with the whole paranormal aspect, so they had invited my older brother to come around and play with us. We played for about an hour before I had decided to give up. We weren't getting anywhere, so what was the point? As I readied myself to move my hands away, the planchette started to go crazy, moving around in circles erratically. "Whoa!" my 4 siblings cried in unison. I sat still, completely in shock and scared. I used to be a skeptic, until I realized something. It wasn't possible for all 5 of us to move the planchette in the same direction. Then, when it started to answer our questions, spelling out in full sentences, I realized this was truly happening. I simply asked in a meek voice, "Who are you?" "Zozo," it replied. Nathan, our brother, almost cried from shock. He explained that he'd heard of Zozo and that he was apparently showing up all over the world. He was a demon. I told everyone we had to say goodbye, trusting my brother as he was almost never wrong. My sisters refused and started asking questions, like if anyone we knew was going to die. The board spelt out, Aurora. We had no idea who Aurora was, so they didn't panic and started asking how this Aurora would die. "Inside," Zozo spelt out. Inside what? The board started moving erratically then, spelling out my name over and over again. I finally convinced my sisters and brother to say goodbye. About 4 months later, I found out I was pregnant. I had forgotten all about my experience with Zozo. Finally, I had found happiness with my husband and my unborn child. Just as I went into labor, my midwife explained that my daughter, who I was going to call Aurora, didn't make it. She was born stillborn. My precious little girl. I advise you to stay away from the Ouija board. I know that the mystery and disbelief can draw you in, but it isn't worth it. I paid for it in the worst possible way. So please, heed my warning. This happened on the Halloween night of 2008, and is not my own experience, but that of my brother, sister, and close friends. It is long, so bear with me. I lived in Canberra during my childhood, and Canberra is known to be the most haunted location in Australia, given its history. Growing up, I never took the paranormal seriously. However, my sister and her 3 friends did. In fact, they were all Wiccans. On occasion, they would try and contact spirits in the closest cemetery at daytime, but would only experience slight things like really cold air or hearing footsteps. On Halloween 2008, they decided to go down to the cemetery at midnight, and my brother and his friend also went along. They were all around the age of 13 to 19. I was 14. For some stubborn and stupid reason, I decided to stay home. I now know that I will regret that decision for the rest of my life. This was definitely a very haunted place, and it is also worth mentioning that it is one of the oldest churches in Australia, being built in 1840. It is called St. John's the Baptist Church. Excitedly they walked down, but not really expecting to see anything amazing. When they reached the cemetery, it was all serious business. They sat down in a circle and held hands, with a candle in the center. Then my sister read something aloud from a book. When it ended, they were all looking around for about 10 minutes, and one of my sister's friends was the first to see something. This thing was glowing a gray color, and it seemed to be fading in and out of focus. It was 20 meters away at the side of the churchyard. They were just watching it for a few minutes, whispering to each other. Then my sister and her 3 friends started slowly walking towards it. As they got closer, it became clearer and clearer that it was a ghost of a young girl in 19th century clothing. They slowly recognized the details and folds in her dress and hair as she was twirling her arms and spinning. They just stared at the figure, silently smiling in awe. They were not threatened at all. She was not aggressive in the least. They always tell me how amazing it was, and I'm still so jealous. My brother and his friend started approaching it slowly as well by the hand gestures of the others. Next to the ghost, there was an old big tree, and they noticed the dirt around it was being flown up in the air, and they started hearing this strange, growling sort of noise, like a dying animal coming from that direction. Something started to form there. It slowly took the shape of a humanoid on all 4s, and was appearing in and out of focus. The girl ghost had disappeared. For some strange reason, it seemed to be digging in the ground very frantically, almost like trying to find something that was buried under the tree. They were happy the seance worked, until now. As the 2 boys cautiously crept up to them before seeing what it was, the strange ghost had stopped and everything went quiet. Suddenly, it looked straight up at them and saw them as some sort of threat. With no warning, it started to crawl and float towards them very aggressively while making a screeching sound. On this path, it disappeared and then reappeared, getting closer as it did. I would imagine tears forming in their eyes as their version of reality was bending. Never a nice feeling. I told them that they should have stayed to see what it wanted. They replied by saying things like, "No way, this thing definitely wanted to hurt us." We all started feeling tremendous fear, and there was no way we would have stayed any longer. As they ran out, excited yet terrified, my brother was the only one to look back, and he said it was still chasing them, while the other girl ghost reappeared in the same spot. Well, they did not go back for months after that. The images were still too vivid. Personally, I would have gone back to check it out the same night, along with a lot of other things. When they did call Mom to pick them up, they explained everything they saw to us when they got home. At first, I did not believe them. Then I got a look at my brother's face. It was so pale white, it was almost like there was no blood in his head at all, and they all had terrified looks on their faces. When they were telling me all this, they held back tears, yet they were really excited at the same time. I had no other choice but to believe them. Often it crosses my mind that the ghost of the young girl was luring them closer to the evil-looking ghost. But why? 1 year later, they went again, and this time I went with them. It was not half as successful, though. I did, after the seance, walk around by myself for a few minutes. I felt very uneasy and threatened for no reason at that moment. I remember vividly seeing something white and ghostly float over my head for about 3 seconds. Walking away from that area, I stayed about 10 meters away from everybody else looking around the graveyard for anything interesting. but saw nothing. After about 5 minutes later, I swear I saw something unfocused that caught my eye. It was wobbling and flickering like a pale green flame. It was around the same area that the ghost of the young girl was last year. It was so captivating and hypnotic. I looked at it with a smile for about 30 seconds, then walked to the others and said, "I think there is something over there." So we walked towards it. I thought, finally, I can have this experience. But sadly, it didn't last that long. As we approached it, it slowly seemed to be different. Surprisingly, all that was there was an old, tall gravestone. Just a gravestone. We felt silly. We all stayed there for about 15 minutes and didn't see anything, only heard the odd noises from inside the church, like someone was moving heavy objects. When we walked home, everybody was saying things like, "Well, that was a dud." I felt angry and upset. To this day, I still wonder what I saw. It couldn't be just a gravestone. They don't fade in and out, glow, move, or change shape. I believe it was a ghost. Sometimes I drive down to the cemetery just to take pictures, hoping to catch something interesting. Out of the 58 I have taken, there is only one picture of a ghost. I have had more experiences, but that's for another time. I'm a late blind. I never used to get scared of any ghost stories, and I always enjoyed catching up with any horror movie. My friends considered me lucky because I was spared from watching the horrifying scenes. I never believed in ghosts and paranormal activities, not until August 2015. We are an Anglo-Indian family, and usually it has been our custom to visit our family bungalow for any special occasion. This time it was my cousin's wedding, and a party was thrown at the bungalow. We were gathered over there, and the music was being played at full blast. As I cannot see, I was slightly getting disoriented, and I requested my cousin Elvis to take me to a quiet place where I could relax. He took me to a lawn, which was at the backyard of the bungalow. We were talking to each other when one of my aunts called out for Elvis. He told me that he would come back, and he left. I was standing there. It was quite cold, and I could vaguely hear the music from far away. Suddenly, the swing in the backyard started swaying. I was wondering who it was, and I asked if someone was there. There was no reply. I thought that the swing must have moved because of the wind. I started feeling uncomfortable after a while. It was as though someone was watching me. I started feeling very cold, and I sensed a presence standing next to me. "Darkus," that person whispered in my ears. I was frightened, because I had never heard such a strange voice ever in my life. I was demanding that person to tell me who it was, but there was no reply. I was trying to find my way out to the party area because I was terribly scared. Just then, Elvis came back to find me in a panic state. He asked me if I was okay, and I questioned him if anyone else was there around me. He told me that there was no one except for me and him. I requested him to take me away from there, and I didn't speak a word after that. Even after that date, that experience gives me a chill in my spine. I can't forget it. I'm not sure if it was a paranormal presence or my cousin's prank on me. But whatever it was scary. I haven't shared it with anyone in my family because I am sure that they will not believe me. In 1914, the Newfoundland sailed up to the ice with a crew of 250 men. On March 30th, 77 men went out on the ice to kill seals. A mighty storm came up while the men were out. That lasted 2 days, and the men could not make it back to the ship. When the storm ceased, Other ships came and helped the crew of the Newfoundland search for the missing men. 72 were found dead, and 5 were missing, presumed drowned. The ship sailed home in sorrow and didn't go to the ice at all the next year. She was considered to be unlucky. To break the curse, the ship was rebuilt and changed so that she would drown no more men. Her new name was the San Blanford, and she was sent to the ice 2 years after the terrible storm. On the 30th of March, she met up with another ship called the Terra Nova. As dusk fell, a fog rolled in, and the crew of the San Blanford heard the Terra Nova blowing her whistle. This was a signal that she still had men out on the ice. As was customary, the crew of the San Blanford started blowing their whistle, and those above deck could hear voices calling out from the ice, and presumed they belonged to the sailors from the Terra Nova. The two ships kept up their signals until 10 p.m., when the voices ceased, and all were presumed safely aboard ship. The next morning, a sailor from the San Blanford boarded the Terra Nova to conduct some business. The captain of the ship immediately asked the sailor what time the members of the San Blanford crew had gotten aboard the previous night. The sailor was puzzled. "We didn't have anyone out on the ice, sir." But the captain and his crew swore that they had seen 5 men board the San Blanford shortly before 10 p.m. When the sailor returned to the San Blanford, he reported the incident to his captain. The captain took him quietly aside and told him that the report was true. A few members of the night crew had seen 5 men climb aboard the San Blanford shortly before 10 p.m. The men were wearing tattered clothing that looked as if it had been ripped and worn out by the waves of the sea, and the crew could see right through their shining bodies. One of the sailors on duty that evening had been on the Newfoundland when she lost the 77 men 2 years ago that very night. He had recognized the faces of the ghosts as those belonging to the 5 men who were presumed drowned. Their spirits had finally returned to the ship from which they had been lost, and could now rest in peace. I used to live in a house that backs up to a big public open space where there are hiking trails. Lots of joggers and people walking their dogs. Anyway, one night, I had a kind of creepy dream that an old lady came into my room and was trying to get me to come outside. The dream woke me up, so I got some water and turned off my fan because it was cold, and then I fell asleep again. I went right back into the same dream with this old lady coming into my room and calmly saying, "You have to go outside now." I kept telling her no, that it was too cold. I woke up again, and my fan was on. I figured I must have just thought I turned it off, or the button got stuck. So I got up, turned the fan off again, and went back to sleep. This time, I had the same exact dream, except she was much older looking in this one, and was really agitated. She was yelling, "Go outside! You must go outside!" I got up in the dream, and followed her to the hallway. When I got to the hallway, she wasn't there, and then I woke up, and I was actually standing in the hallway. I have never, ever walked around in my sleep before or after this. Also, my fan was on when I went back to my room. At this point, I was freaked out, so I got something to eat and watched TV for a couple of hours. I went back to bed around 5 or 6, and the dream didn't come back. The messed up part is, a couple of days later, I saw that there were police cars in the open space, and when I asked my mom what happened, she said they had found an older woman who was reported missing a few days before. She must have had a heart attack or a stroke or something on the trail by my house, and they had found the body. My boyfriend lives in a Civil War-era plantation home on a huge farm. The place has a weird vibe to it. None of the animals will come upstairs. If you bring them up, they will start shaking and dart back downstairs. My boyfriend won't even go in one of the bedrooms. Slave shackles are still hanging up in the basement. The place has apparently been pretty dormant as far as paranormal activity goes for the past year. I've had a couple odd experiences. My boyfriend says that it always gets more active around the holidays, though. In November, right before Thanksgiving, I was staying the night with him. I was about to fall asleep, and I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was the pack of coyotes that roam around the back of the farm, but I heard it again a few seconds after the first time, and it was definitely not a coyote. I immediately woke up and was aware of my surroundings, and I heard it again. It was a woman outside, calling for a man named John. She sounded so panicked and distressed. I heard her call a few more times, and I could hear the voice moving around the yard. I was creeped out, but I cuddled up to my boyfriend and went back to sleep. When I told him about it in the morning, he said, "That's a new one." Fast forward to exactly a month from my experience. I wake up, and the first thing out of my boyfriend's mouth is, "Remember a couple weeks ago, you heard a woman outside calling for someone? What name was it?" "John," I said. "I heard it last night," he replied. I set a reminder on my phone for the next month, but nothing happened. Really eerie. I've been trying to find out the history of the house to find out if a John ever lived there. I lived in a weird house as a kid, which resulted in chairs being moved in other rooms when I was the only one home, kitchen cupboards opening late at night when no one else was awake. I could be sitting at the computer in a lit room at night and watch as a black cloud would float through a closed door and sit, suspended in the air, across the room from me. I had footsteps that would walk outside my door and loud breathing. I was so terrified as a child that I ended up sleeping with music playing so I could tune out the noises. I still, to this day, cannot sleep without music playing. I probably could have convinced myself that most of it wasn't real as I aged, if it wasn't for a certain weird happening. It was about 11 a.m. in the morning, and my younger brother and I were waiting at home while my mother was out doing jobs. We were waiting for her to come back to pick us up, so we were sitting by the front window watching for her car, and then we heard the radio playing from my brother's room. We both didn't understand why it was on all of a sudden, so we walked to my brother's room. My brother hid behind me, and I had to walk in the room first, and the second I crossed the threshold, the radio went silent. Upon closer inspection, we realized it wasn't even plugged in, and there were no batteries in the back of it. There was no logical explanation for it to be playing, and my brother, a young boy, had a bunch of Matchbox cars and an old car playmat, and he swore and declared that he had parked the cars neatly on it, in lines. But when we went in there, the cars were thrown all over the room. Luckily, we moved out of that house, but my brother and I still remember the radio saga clearly to this day, and it's pretty much the only reason I know I wasn't completely crazy as a child. Before my girlfriend and I moved in together, my girlfriend lived alone in the house she owned. During the course of us dating and me spending the night, she finally explained some of the weird stuff going on in her home. Weird banging sounds happening at all hours. Other weird sounds. Seeing things from the corner of your eye. There were even a couple of times where we saw something walking around the house. She described it as being a robed figure, almost like the Grim Reaper. There was also the feeling that something was watching you from behind. You know, that same feeling that causes the hairs on the back of your neck to stand on end. But the worst was this constant foreboding feeling coming from one of the unused bedrooms. These happenings scared her so much, simply explaining it caused her to start crying. Now, I'm a skeptic about these things. I'm that guy that would watch all of those paranormal shows and find the logical reasoning for things happening. Since we were just dating at the time, and I really liked her, I wanted to show her my bravado and my lack of fear for the thing in the room. Get out of this house, you fucking asshole. I command you to get out of this house, I yelled into the room. Do not bother her again, you hear me? Or you'll have to deal with me. You do not want to fuck with me. Big mistake. Really big mistake. I spent that night at my girlfriend's. Sometime in the middle of the night, I suddenly woke up to a night terror. I had had them a couple of times before. I didn't experience anything crazy, but this instance felt intentional. It felt like I had poked a bear, and it wanted to show me that it didn't want to be messed with. I woke up to being paralyzed, heart throbbing, being able to see and hear what was around you. I could feel my girlfriend lying down next to me, and I could hear her breathing. This wasn't the scary part, though. The scariest part was hearing. Yes, hearing. Something run out of the room and down the stairs away from me and towards the unused bedroom. I could hear it make its way through the house. I desperately tried to get out of this night terror. I tried telling myself it was just a dream. I tried praying. I desperately tried to call out my girlfriend's name. I knew it was a night terror, but still couldn't get out of it. Every time before, I could get out of a night terror by reminding myself what it was. She somehow heard my whispered calls and woke me up. I did not go back to sleep that night. Yesterday, my sister woke up and witnessed what she believed to be an evil spirit. It took the appearance of an onryo, or vengeful spirit, possessing a white gown and red eyes. It was standing nearly as high as the ceiling and was slouched over. It was estimated to be 7 to 8 feet tall. My sister claimed to have a feeling of dread upon seeing the figure. Note that I was asleep at this time, and my sister had been sleeping on the floor. At first, I didn't believe her at all. I thought she was seeing things. But then I began seeing things. I still dismissed it as natural. However, ever since today, my sister gets these crippling stomach cramps whenever she enters my room, where the sighting took place. The cramps go away whenever she leaves the room. I do not experience these cramps, and my sister never pulls pranks or anything of the sort. I recently caught more glimpses of the figure, but nothing much else has happened to me, aside from feeling dread as well. Our other friends didn't believe us when we told them. After a long time researching, my sister's problem still persists, and it's starting to get worse. My family is starting to have problems and arguments as well, and I feel that it will continue to get worse if action is not taken. Is it a ghost or a demon? Or could it perhaps be naturally explained? Because at this point, I'm just not sure. I just hope we can remove the problem and continue on, because everything is starting to fall to pieces. I cannot guarantee that my experience is paranormal, but I can definitely guarantee it is causing a lot of problems and issues throughout. Please help. Thank you.
After I had already been away for work for several months, my wife had to move us to Virginia. She found a pretty house to rent, almost lavish by our standards and plenty of room, very modern. Well, she would call me while I was away and say she was having bad dreams and felt like someone was staring at her from the bathroom closet area. Also, our daughter was pushed so hard she fell down and thought my wife had done it, but she was sitting on the couch 10 feet away. So, I made the usual prescription when we had run into this before. I told her to put a very powerful crucifix in the room blessed by the Pope, and told her to shield herself with white light before going to bed. I came home about a month later and immediately felt a presence. It did not take long to figure out that the presence was in a large closet area which adjoined the bathroom and faced directly towards the bed in the master bedroom. The closet area never got natural sunlight and was extremely dark at night. I could feel that something was watching. The crucifix seemed to keep it out of the room, but it still stared from the closet, so I did the usual. "Get out, this is my house. I command you to leave," etc. I felt that this thing was not going anywhere, that it was not scared at all. It was not moving. Not long after that, we found a picture of our children on the floor, and it had been smashed in the middle of the frame like something was thrown at it. One night, while watching TV, my wife left for work, and I saw a rather large shadow fly out of the bedroom and out towards the car as she was leaving, almost as if it was chasing her. Not long after that, she suffered a stroke and a major car accident, both of which left no lasting injuries. I was again traveling when I returned home. I learned that the landlord was kicking us out. I was glad and realized that we had to get out quick not to be followed, but my wife severely scratched her eye while moving, and that slowed us down. The last day, as we were moving, both my wife and I were out on the back lawn under the window not far from the closet, and we both heard a tapping on the window. No one was in the house. I knew what it was the whole time due to the strength of the presence, that it was a demon. The last night, as I left, a neighbor stopped me to talk, and I could see this shadow filtering around the yard. Unfortunately, it followed us to the new house, but it was full of sunshine and good karma. It opened doors, and I saw it a couple times in the hall. It also bothered my son, who saw it in the basement. I told him to ignore it. Do not feed it with fear, and you'll basically bore it into leaving. I have seen, run into, ghosts and the like, but this was different. Very different. The only option is to get out so fast that it cannot follow. This thing could travel. It was crazy. So, in short, it has stopped bothering us and life is normal again. But it is a learning experience that there are some things that you cannot will or scare away, and that will do some major damage to you if you are not aware and able to leave before tragedy happens.
I had a bad experience about 4 years ago. I think that I might have brought something with me when I went to that country where they worship demons. praying and giving them offerings so that they don't get troubled by them. I went to visit ancient sites when they had a lot of those worshipping hotels. I was kind of curious, and I approached a lot of those. At times, I felt like my ears were blocked, like I couldn't hear properly. Afterward, I began to have weird and bad thoughts. Very unusual coming from me. After I returned home, I felt weird. I was seeing shadows out of the corner of my eyes. I was surprised to find myself talking to them many times. One night my daughter woke up around 1 a.m., crying, just to tell me that she had a bad dream, that she had seen me being sucked up by a black tornado. I sent her back to her room and went back to sleep. At exactly 3 a.m., I woke up from a nightmare. My heart was pounding like it was going to burst out of my chest. I never, ever felt my heart pounding so hard in my whole life. Then, suddenly, the TV turned on by itself. I got freaked out and told my husband about it. Having not found any explanation to this, we went back to sleep. The following night, same scenario. Nightmare. Woke up at exactly the same time, 3 a.m. Heart pounding. TV turns on its own, showing some worshipping temples, the same kind I saw in the country I visited. I prefer not to mention what country and what religion were those temples out of respect. The day before, I had tuned the TV to the channel that has shows on spirituality. This time, my husband prayed in front of the TV and then went back to bed. On the third night, I went through the whole thing again. Nightmare. Opened my eyes to look at the clock's red numbers. 3 a.m. I got really pissed. I woke my husband up and I said, "That's enough." I wasn't afraid anymore. I told my husband, "I brought it here. I'm the one who has to kick it out." A sudden strength filled me, and I started to pray loudly, claiming clearly that my family belonged to God, and that I wanted this demon out of my life, and that I wasn't afraid of him. My whole body was trembling, and the TV started to turn on and off until it finally turned off for good. I never felt so strong in all my life. Ever. I was like a lioness protecting her territory and challenging an intruder. I never had problems after that night when I stood up to it. But I was curious to know why 3 a.m. The weekend after, my pastor told me the whole thing about the evil 3 a.m. hour. I was shocked. I am relieved to see that I am not the only one that it occurred to. Maybe differently, but still the same hour.
I was around 15 years old and went to visit a very well-known friend of mine. She lived in a very big house, well maintained. It was my first time visiting as my parents were very strict and I had limited time with my friends. As I walked into her house, I got a chilled feeling over my body that made my hair stand up. I ignored the feeling as I did not want to scare my friend and spoil our bonding time. We watched movies, etc. While watching movies, I got a shiver over my body and I immediately felt an unpleasant entity in the room with us. I could not sit still and felt uncomfortable as I could feel it was staring at me. My friend asked me what was wrong, and I said that I have a tummy ache. I got up and walked to the kitchen to get some water. As I turned around, there it was. This demon-like creature, not sure what to call it, stood there, grinning at me. It was a very dark figure with red eyes and sharp yellow teeth. I remember it like it was yesterday. I just stood there frozen with fear. It came toward me like teasing me and chased me around the kitchen table with a knife in its hand. I lost contact with my friend, and until this day she has no idea why I left. I feel bad for not telling her what happened. I think I was just so terrified, and the thought of seeing it again actually quite scared me.